She's my wife now. Those were the words that silenced an entire crowd. But before that moment, have you ever wondered what it feels like when your own family
What am I
auctions
bid
you
for
off like
this
cattle?
fine specimen of
What kind of
womanhood?
wound festers
Do
when the
I
people
hear
meant to protect you
$20?
are the very ones who strip away your dignity, leaving you bleeding, limping, and alone with a newborn in your arms? And here's the question that will carry you forward. When a broken woman like Clara is claimed not out of pity, but out of courage, can her life truly begin again? Or will the scars of betrayal follow her even into this unexpected marriage? Stay with me, because the answer will change the way you see love, survival, and second chances forever. The noon sun beat down on Dry Creek, turning dust into blinding haze. Folks gathered at the stock pen, not for cattle, but for spectacle. On the platform stood Clara, 50 years old, leaning on her cane. Her limp and her size had long made her the target of whispers. Today her own kin had turned her into a bargain. Her brother-in-law, Ephraim Pike, raised his voice like an auctioneer. Here she is, a widow with hands enough for chores and biscuits for breakfast. Limp or no limp, she'll do. Who'll start at $2? Laughter rolled through the crowd. A man coughed cripple into his fist. Another called out, "She eats more than she earns." Women turned away as if pitying her cost too much. Clara stood still. She had learned how. Inside, the words cut like knives, but she let none of it show. Her body had become armor after decades of judgment armor that grew heavier with every sneer. A ranch hand raised his hand. $1.50. She won't last a season. $2, Ephraim barked, pleased. That'll cover the feed bill. Clara smoothed her dress, chin lifted, though her heart was breaking. The crowd's laughter blurred into a roar of humiliation. She had been reduced to less than a mule, for at least a mule fetched pride in trade. From the edge of the circle, Thomas Avery watched. A widowed rancher with 2 young sons, he had not come for this. Yet as he saw Clara's dignity crushed beneath every cruel word, something in him shifted. He knew loneliness. He knew loss. And he knew the difference between justice and mockery. When Ephraim shouted, "Sold for $2, Thomas's voice cut the air. No. The crowd stilled. Thomas stepped forward, broad-shouldered, calm. He draped his weathered coat across Clara's shoulders. Its weight felt like shelter, like worth. "This isn't a sale," Thomas said evenly. He laid silver coins on the crate. "Take this for your debts, but she is no burden to auction." Ephraim stammered. You can't just..." Thomas turned his voice steady enough for all to hear. "She's my wife now." Gas rippled. Someone dropped a tin cup, but Thomas didn't flinch. He simply stood beside Clara, not holding her, only standing close enough to let her choose. Clara trembled under the coat. For years she had been called too much, too little, never enough. And now before a mocking crowd, one man had said she was his equal. She met his gaze. He didn't see her limp. He didn't see her size. He saw her. For the first time in decades, Clara felt the faint spark of something she thought long dead hope. Would one man's courage be enough to heal a lifetime of wounds, and could she dare to believe it? The crowd at Dry Creek scattered slowly, whispering like prairie wind. Some laughed, others shook their heads, muttering that Thomas Avery had gone mad. A crippled widow bought for pride, what use could she be? But Clara felt none of it. She only felt the heavy coat around her shoulders. It smelled of leather, wood smoke, and earth, a scent of belonging she had never known. Thomas didn't pull her arm. He simply said, "You don't have to stay here. Come with me. The boys and I will make room for you." Her lips trembled. Why would you, after what they said? His gaze was steady, calm as the Montana horizon, because they were wrong, and because no one deserves to be left standing alone. The words were simple, but they pierced deeper than all the cruelty. For years, Clara had been told she was too much or not enough. No one had ever said she deserved not to be alone. She looked at Ephraim Pike, her late husband's brother, still clutching the coins. He muttered bitterly, "Good riddance." Clara's heart clenched, but she didn't answer. What answer could there be? Instead, she stepped forward, leaning on her cane. Thomas didn't reach for her hand. He only walked beside her, matching his pace to hers. That respect, more than any gesture, began to steady her steps. Outside the station, Thomas's wagon waited. 2 boys sat perched on the side. Caleb, sharp-eyed, and 12 and little Luke, round-faced, only 7. Their laughter stilled when they saw Clara. Luke whispered something and Caleb elbowed him quiet. This is Clara, Thomas told them, his voice gentle but firm. She'll be with us now. Clara braced herself for more laughter, another cruel glance. But Luke only tilted his head and asked softly, Are you cold? He hopped down and tugged at her coat as if to tuck it closer. That small kindness nearly broke her. The wagon jolted forward, wheels creaking, horses snorting into the autumn air. Clara sat stiffly, clutching her suitcase, the boys stealing glances at her. The land rolled out wide in wild sagebrush, golden fields, distant blue ridges. She felt as if she were leaving one life behind and entering another, though she didn't yet know if it was safety or just another kind of prison. As dusk settled, Thomas pointed to a rise in the land. That's our place. His ranch was no mansion, but it stood strong, a weathered barn, a neat corral, a house with light glowing from the windows. Chickens pecked in the yard and smoke rose from the chimney. It was not wealth she saw, it was steadiness, built plank by honest hands. Thomas helped her down. You're tired, he said. Let me show you your room. Inside, Clara's heart thudded. There was a room waiting, small but clean, with a quilt folded neatly on the bed. Not a servant's cot, not a corner of shame. A room of her own. Why give me this? She whispered, afraid of the answer. Thomas shrugged quiet. Because dignity is free, and you've earned more than most. Tears she had buried for decades blurred her sight. She sat on the bed, clutching the quilt as if it were the proof of a miracle. And for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to wonder, could this really be a beginning? The first night in the Avery house was quiet, too quiet. Clara lay awake in the little room Thomas had given her, listening to the creak of timbers and the soft wind brushing against the shutters. Outside, the coyotes howled, but what echoed louder in her heart were the words from the station, "Good riddance." She pressed her hand against the quilt, reminding herself this was not another cold cot in her in-laws' barn. This was shelter. But fear gnawed at her. Would it last? Would she be cast out again, once her limp, her age, her broken past became too heavy a burden? At dawn, the smell of coffee and frying bacon seeped under her door. She rose, wrapped her shawl, and stepped into the kitchen. Thomas stood at the stove, spatula in hand. The boys sat at the table, whispering in the way children do when a stranger unsettles their world. Good morning, Thomas greeted, as though nothing about her presence was unusual. He slid eggs onto a plate and set it before her. Sit, eat. Clara hesitated, then lowered herself slowly into the chair. Luke offered her a shy smile while Caleb watched her carefully, suspicion flickering in his young eyes. Papa, Caleb said after a moment. She limps. She won't keep up with us. The words struck deep, sharper than he knew. Clara lowered her gaze, but Thomas's voice was steady. A limp doesn't make a person weak, son. Sometimes it means they've carried more than most. Caleb flushed and went silent. Clara's chest tightened with gratitude and shame. She did not want pity, yet Thomas's defense was different. He wasn't excusing her. He was valuing her. After breakfast, she followed him into the yard. The air was crisp, the ground damp with dew. Thomas handed her a basket. The hens will lay more if they're gathered regular, he said simply. It's yours if you want it. The work was familiar grounding. She stroked each feathered back, whispered gentle words to calm the hens. Her late husband had never allowed her such tasks, mocking her limp as a hindrance. But here no one scolded. She was trusted with something small, yet it felt like a gift. By evening, the boys had begun to circle her like wary colts. Luke offered her a pebble he had found shaped like a heart. Caleb watched as she mended his torn sleeve with neat stitches. Slowly their walls thinned, but Clara's own walls loomed high. That night she looked into the small mirror above her washstand and whispered, Don't believe it. Don't believe this is yours. For she knew too well how quickly kindness could vanish. Later, as she poured water into a basin, she caught sight of Thomas on the porch, hat in hand, watching the fading sunset. His broad shoulders slumped, a man carrying grief too heavy for words. He had given her a room, a place, but she could see it. He, too, was still a stranger to peace. Clara stood in the doorway, the weight of silence between them. Part of her longed to step forward to offer comfort, but fear chained her. She turned away, clutching her shawl. For all his generosity, Thomas was still a mystery. Was he truly the man who had said, "She's my wife now," out of compassion, Or had she simply traded one loneliness for another? The prairie wind whispered through the cracks of the house, carrying her question into the night. Winter swept over Montana like a merciless hand. Snow piled against the windows of the Avery Ranch, and the wind howled like a chorus of ghosts across the frozen plains. Inside, the fire burned steadily, but the chill in Clara's chest lingered. By now, weeks had passed since she had stepped across Thomas's gate. She had cooked, mended, milked the cow, and helped the boys with their lessons. Outwardly, she belonged. Yet inwardly, she carried the same wound she had brought with her from the station, that gnawing certainty that all of this was temporary. One evening after the boys had gone to bed, Thomas sat at the table with ledgers spread before him. Clara cleared the dishes quietly, not wishing to intrude. But Thomas looked up. "You're good with numbers," he said. "I saw how you kept the accounts for the feed last week." Clara stilled. Her late husband had always mocked her interest in such things, saying, "A woman's mind is for sewing, not sums." "I just try to be useful," she replied softly. Thomas studied her. His gaze was not pitying, but steady. "Useful," he repeated. "Clara, you're not a tool. You're a person. You're family now." The word struck her like a blow. Family. Her in-laws had thrown her out like rubbish. Her own kin had auctioned her off. Could she believe such a word? She turned away quickly, pretending to fuss with the dishcloth. "Don't say things you'll regret," she whispered. Thomas rose, crossing the room. He didn't touch her, only stood near enough that she felt his presence. "I don't waste words, Clara. And I don't say what I don't mean." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. She wanted to believe him, but scars have long memories. The next day, the test of trust came swift and brutal. Clara had gone into town for flour. Inside the general store, whispers began before she even reached the counter. "There she is, the fat cripple the Avery rancher dragged home. Must be desperate paying for a wife like that. She'll eat him out of house and home before spring." The words sliced through her, sharper than any winter wind. She kept her head down, paid for her flour, and left without a word. But as she stepped outside, tears blurred her vision. To her shock, Thomas was there, waiting with the wagon. He must have seen her face because his jaw tightened. "What happened?" "Nothing," she said quickly, clutching the sack of flour to her chest. "It's always nothing." He didn't believe her. He stepped inside the store, his broad frame filling the doorway. Clara wanted to stop him, but her feet were rooted. His voice thundered through the little building. "Any man who mocks my wife mocks me, and I'll not stand for it." The store fell into stunned silence. When he returned, Clara's heart pounded with shame and awe. He climbed into the wagon, set the reins, and looked straight ahead. She whispered, "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he answered. His voice was low, almost tender. "You think I brought you here to be mocked? You are under my roof, Clara. That means you are under my protection, always." The word always lingered between them, more powerful than any vow she had ever heard. That night, Clara sat by the fire long after Thomas and the boys had gone to bed. She touched the hem of her dress where her fingers trembled. She remembered the cruelty of the townsfolk, their sneers, their laughter. But she remembered, too, Thomas's voice in the store firm, unwavering, claiming her not as a burden, but as his own. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to think, maybe I am more than what they say I am. But hope is fragile, and Clara knew one act of kindness was not enough to erase a lifetime of rejection. She still feared waking one day to find herself abandoned again. The question echoed inside her as the fire burned low. Could she ever trust that Thomas's words were true, that she was not only sheltered but cherished? The Montana sky had a way of changing its mind. One moment it was calm, stretching wide and endless, and the next it was brooding heavy with clouds that rolled like war drums across the prairie. That week the land seemed to hold its breath as a storm gathered strength. Clara could feel it in her bones, in the ache of her knee, as she walked across the yard, in the stillness of the animals who seemed to sense what was coming. Thomas was out riding fence lines, trying to secure the cattle before the blizzard struck. The boys Caleb and Luke carried water and gathered firewood. Clara, too, worked with a quiet urgency, but fear nipped at her heels. She knew what winter storms could do: swallow men whole, freeze herds, bury homes beneath snow. Her late husband had perished in one, his body never found until spring thaw. She never forgot the sight of neighbors carrying what was left of him on a wooden sled. That memory clung to her now like a shadow. As evening fell, the first flakes descended soft, at first then fierce, whirling in the wind. By nightfall, the ranch was under siege. Snow piled against the door, the roof groaned under its weight, and the wind shrieked through the eaves like a wounded beast. Thomas returned at last, his face raw from the cold. "The herd's as safe as I can manage," he said, stripping off his frozen coat. "But we'll need to watch them through the night. This storm's no passing squall. It'll test us." Clara nodded, feeding another log to the fire. She said nothing of her fears, but her hands trembled as she poured coffee into tin cups. Hours passed. The boys slept by the fire, curled under quilts. The storm worsened, rattling the windows. Then above the wind, a faint sound reached them, a lowing cry, desperate and strained. Thomas stiffened. "That's the cattle," he muttered. "The corral's giving way." He grabbed his coat, but Clara's hand shot out. "You can't," she said, her voice sharp with fear. "You'll be buried alive in that snow." He met her eyes. "If the herd's lost, we're ruined." Clara swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed to keep him safe, but she knew he was right. The ranch's survival depended on those animals. "Then you won't go alone," she said firmly. Before Thomas could protest, she wrapped herself in a heavy shawl, tied her boots tight, and grabbed the lantern. The storm hit them like a wall. Snow blinded their eyes, stung their skin, clawed at their clothes. Together they pushed toward the corral, their bodies bent low against the gale. The lantern flame flickered wildly, barely clinging to life. When they reached the corral, disaster loomed. The gate had been blown open, and panicked cattle pressed against the broken fence, ready to scatter into the storm. Thomas fought to drive them back, shouting over the roar of the wind. Clara stumbled beside him, her knee throbbing with each step. Then she saw it, a calf, small and weak, trapped in the snowdrift, bawling helplessly as the others surged around it. Without thinking, she plunged toward it. Thomas shouted her name, but the storm swallowed his voice. She dropped the lantern into the snow, freed the calf's legs with numbed hands, and heaved the trembling creature into her arms. Pain shot through her knee, but she did not let go. With a strength born of desperation, she carried the calf back to safety, shielding it with her body. Thomas reached, her eyes wide with astonishment. Together they forced the gate shut, secured it with ropes, and pressed their weight against it until the herd calmed. By the time they staggered back to the house, both were shaking, their faces raw, their clothes soaked. Inside, the boys stirred awake as Clara sank to her knees, clutching the calf that still whimpered softly. She looked up at Thomas, breathless, her hair plastered to her face. "I couldn't leave it," she whispered. Thomas crouched before her, his hand brushing snow from her cheek. "You didn't just save the calf," he said, his voice low with awe. "You saved us all." That night, when the storm raged its fiercest, Thomas sat beside Clara by the fire. The boys had fallen asleep again, and the rescued calf rested in the corner, wrapped in blankets. Thomas turned to her. "Clara, I've seen men crumble in less. But you," his voice faltered, "you're stronger than anyone I know." Clara lowered her eyes. For years, her weight, her limp, her past had been thrown at her as curses, chains meant to keep her down. But tonight, in the howl of the storm, she had been more than the sum of her scars. She had been enough. Tears welled in her eyes. "All my life, Thomas, I've been told I was too much, too heavy, too slow, too unworthy. And tonight, for the first time, I didn't think. I just acted. And I wasn't too much. I was exactly what was needed." Thomas's rough hand covered hers. "And that's who you are, Clara. Exactly what's needed." For a moment, the firelight caught her face, softening the lines carved by grief and age. She was not young anymore, but she was radiant. The strength of a lifetime of survival glowed in her eyes. The storm passed by morning, leaving the land buried but unbroken. When Thomas opened the door, the world was pure and white, gleaming under a pale sun. Clara stood beside him, the boys at her skirts, the calf wobbling in the snow. They looked out together, and for once she did not see emptiness. She saw possibility. Thomas turned to her. "Clara, storms like this come and go. But what happened last night, that will stay with me forever." She met his gaze. For the first time, she believed it. Clara had stepped into the storm as a woman burdened by doubt. She emerged as someone reborn, not fragile, not broken, but whole. Her scars had not vanished, But now they no longer chained her. They marked her strength, her survival. And as she stood there with Thomas and the boys with the winter sun breaking through the clouds, she felt a quiet certainty her place was here. Spring in Montana was never gentle. It didn't tiptoe in with blossoms and songbirds. It fought its way through the last bite of winter, breaking the grip of snow with sudden thaws, swollen rivers, and winds that carried the smell of thawed earth and promise. For Clara, this spring was different. The storm that had nearly claimed the cattle was weeks behind them now. Life on the ranch had resumed its rhythm, mending fences, feeding stock, teaching the boys their lessons, and tending to the small garden Clara had insisted they plant near the house. Every morning she rose early, stoked the fire, and listened to the hush of dawn while Thomas and the boys stirred awake. For the first time in decades, she did not dread the day, but more than routine had shifted. Something inside her had cracked open in that storm and had not closed again. Clara found herself laughing more quiet laughs at first than deep ones that startled even her. She found herself singing under her breath as she cooked, humming lullabies to the calf that now followed the boys around like a pet. When she caught her reflection in the polished kettle, she no longer saw the woman left behind at the train station. She saw someone alive. Thomas noticed, though he said little. He was not a man for many words, but his actions were steady. When he came in from the fields, he placed a hand on her shoulder as if to say, "I see you." When she limped more heavily after a long day, he fetched water and rubbed her aching knee, his rough fingers, careful as though touching something sacred. The boys, too, had changed. Caleb, once cautious and guarded, now trusted her fully. He sought her advice before fixing tools, asked her to check his arithmetic, and even showed her the beginnings of a wooden toy he had carved. Luke clung to her, often slipping his hand into hers during walks, whispering stories about school, about the calf, about dreams of riding wild horses someday. For Clara, their trust was more precious than gold. One evening after supper, Thomas spoke. His voice was quiet, almost uncertain. "Clara," he said, setting aside his cup, "there's a barn dance in town next Saturday." Clara froze. A dance, she repeated, her cheeks warming. He nodded. "The boys would like it. They've not had a chance to see other children for weeks. And—" he hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "I thought perhaps you might come." Her chest tightened. For years she had avoided gatherings, knowing the whispers, the sideways glances, the cruel laughter. The memory of that station of being mocked, abandoned, still lingered. "I don't dance anymore," she said softly. Thomas's eyes held hers. "Then don't. Come to stand with me. Come as part of this family." Clara looked down at her hands, rough and work-worn. Could she face a crowd again? The night of the dance arrived. The barn was strung with lanterns, music spilling out into the cool spring air. Wagons lined the yard, horses tied to posts, voices mingling with fiddle tunes. Clara's heart pounded as Thomas helped her down from the wagon. The boys ran ahead, eager, while Thomas offered his arm. Inside, the warmth was overwhelming. Laughter, movement, skirts, twirling boots, stomping on wooden floors. Clara felt every eye on her, though perhaps most were not. She heard the whispers anyway, real or imagined. Too big. Too plain. What's she doing here? Her chest tightened. She nearly turned back. But then Luke's hand found hers. "Come on, Mama," he said brightly. "Dance with us." The word Mama rang like a bell in her soul, steadying her. She let him pull her forward. Caleb joined, grinning sheepishly, and soon they were moving together, not quite dancing, but circling in the joy of the music. Laughter bubbled from Clara's lips, surprising her. And when she dared glance up, she saw Thomas watching her. His eyes were not filled with pity or tolerance, they were filled with pride. Later, when the boys were occupied with pie and games, Thomas guided Clara outside into the cool night air. Lantern light flickered on his face, carving deep lines of weariness, but also something else, hope. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "I've not been a man to rush things. You know that. When I asked you to come here, it wasn't for love, it was for survival. But since that day, you've done more than keep this family alive." He paused, emotion thick in his throat. "You've given us joy again. You've given my boys a mother. You've given me a partner. And if you'd allow it, I'd like to make this more than necessity. I'd like to make it love." Clara's breath caught. She had long ago stopped believing such words were meant for her. Tears filled her eyes. "I've been told all my life I was too much," she whispered. Too heavy, too slow, too unwanted. But with you, Thomas, I feel enough. More than enough. He reached for her hand, holding it firmly. You are more than enough. You are everything. The stars stretched endless above them, and beneath that vast Montana sky, Thomas leaned down and kissed her, not with haste, not with desperation, but with a tenderness that spoke of years ahead. Seasons turned. The garden flourished, the boys grew taller, the ranch thrived. Clara's limp never vanished, but it no longer defined her. She moved with quiet strength, her laughter carrying through the rooms of the house, her presence steady and healing. Years later, when neighbors spoke of Thomas's ranch, they did not speak only of the cattle or the land. They spoke of the woman who had come broken and left whole, who had turned a house into a home, who had faced storms and scorn and still stood tall. Clara had not been rescued. She had been seen. And in being seen, she had found herself again. Hope is not always a blazing fire. Sometimes it is a steady lamp carried through the dark until dawn arrives. Clara had carried that lamp all her life, even when she thought it had gone out. And with Thomas and the boys, it finally burned bright. Their love story was not written in grand gestures or pretty words. It was written in bread, shared in storms, weathered in hands, held steady through sorrow and joy. And for Clara, it was enough. In the end, Clara's journey reminds us that sometimes the deepest scars do not come from the body, but from the soul, from words that cut, from families that abandon, from years of being unseen. And yet, through kindness and courage, even the wounds we thought could never heal can find balm. When Thomas stood before her and said, "She's my wife now," he wasn't rescuing Clara. He was recognizing her dignity, her worth, and the quiet strength she had carried all her life. There's a lesson here for all of us. No matter how late in life it may seem, no matter how heavy the burdens we carry, there is always the possibility of being seen, of being valued, and of beginning again. Love doesn't erase the past, but it can transform it, making even the most painful chapters part of a larger story of hope. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to reflect. Have you ever known someone who carried scars, silently waiting for someone to truly see them? Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you like to hear the next chapter in Clara and Thomas's journey, or other stories of second chances like this one? And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to None. Wild West Saga, share this video, and join us in keeping these healing stories alive. Because sometimes the stories of the past help us heal the present.